Hello and welcome to Royale Without Cheese, our bi-weekly podcast in which we discuss both the classic and the unknown of Hollywood and foreign cinema from the then and now. We are three filmmakers and your hosts, me, Tomás Ferreira, Miguel Aido.
Hi there.
Hello, and Leonardo Miranda.
Hello.
This is our talk show segment where we welcome grand indie filmmakers to our wonderful couch and discuss their work. Here with us we have Nicole Chi, a very promising Costa Rican-born Chinese director. Her work has been recognized at several festivals, including South by Southwest, New York Latino Film Festival, and Clermont-Ferrand. In 2022, she was distinguished by the Directors Guild of America with an award for Outstanding Directorial Achievement for her short film Comadre, and recently Guian, her debut documentary feature film, premiered at the acclaimed Visions du Real International Film Festival. We'll discuss the journey behind both these intimate films and check up on her latest short film in the making, Floaters. So Nicole, how are we feeling today?
Ooh, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. All good.
Yeah.
We have a first question for Guian. Guian is your debut documentary feature film. It focuses on your relationship with your grandmother and the uncovering of her story after her passing. In the film, you connect with many different places and many different people that knew her, and eventually leading you to China, looking for the house her grandmother left when she came to Costa Rica, which became yours and your family home. This film was a very intimate film with a very long process, I think 6 or 8 years in the making, correct?
Yeah.
So we really want to ask about what was that first moment when you realized that you want to tell this story, and how did the story structure change over time from those initial thoughts to the editing?
So the idea of this actually started in college when I was doing my bachelor's degree in the University of Costa Rica. We had a class for documentary, and we were actually pitching our ideas, and only a few of us would be able to make a film. And at the time, I was having this discovery about my relationship with my grandmother. I think I had a more consciousness of I'm with my grandma every week, every weekend, and I just cannot talk to her. I'm there, I enjoy my time with her, but I can't speak with her. But at the time, her health was not in a good place. And even though I won the pitch, I declined. I was like, no, I don't think I can make this film at this moment,
Right.
And then time passed, and I guess I lost momentum because of her health issues. And then she unfortunately passed away. And in that moment, I was like, no, I cannot let any more time pass for this to be made. And so I started to think of other ways I could make a film, even if she wasn't there anymore. And that kind of, and I think the biggest push that I had was when I got this scholarship to go to live in China. And that was when I was like, okay, I'm just going to take this opportunity. There's no money for making this film, but I'm just going to go and try to find her house. I thought that the film would be, yes, I live in Costa Rica. I'm just going to go to China, and structurally it would be just that trip, but more immediately going to China, most of it in China. Mm-hmm. And after my trip in China, I realized the importance of me being Costa Rican too, as part of my identity, and because of course I know my story, but people cannot understand or relate to what it is to be Costa Rican or seeing Chinese looking people speaking Spanish. And so I understood that I had to have these two sides. And fortunately I had been filming just because I don't know, I got into the habit of doing that during that time, mainly for me, because I knew that I was a character, and I felt kind of uncomfortable at first being filmed and this kind of process. But I thought the film would finish right when I opened my grandma's house. I thought that would be the end of the film. And as you guys know, it wasn't. So finding the structure was mainly done in the edit and through writing the narration. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And how, I mean, you kind of explained in a sense how it takes so long, but how do you go from what would be 1 year or 2 years to 6 or 8 years in the making of it?
Oh, I think it was such an on and off project because, well, for me, actually living in China was like a personal adventure. Like I seriously like do speak any Chinese, and it was like very hard emotionally for me. It was really hard. So I was like filming things as they happen, and I think that you can feel that in the doc
Yes.
itself. Like it's very kind of spontaneous and like what is happening, like filming it. And I just didn't have any funding like for the film itself at the time. I got funding like when I had already shot the Chinese part of the film, actually much later. I think that it's also due to the fact that it was so personal. There was a period of time at the beginning that I felt like this film was just for me. First, I thought it was just for me. And then I was like, okay, maybe this is for my family just. Like was not sure that this was like going to appeal a wider audience. Like I don't know if anyone cares about this. I was like I was struggling with that idea. And then as I started to edit it, I started the editing process by myself, because of all of this construction I had made in my mind. And I showed it to a couple of like really close friends that are also filmmakers, and they were like, "What are you talking about? Like, this is a film. Like I'm not like they're not Chinese, and they're like, I'm not Chinese, but I feel things. And I think there is something here that you should share." And so from there, I like took the courage, and like I had a conversation with a really close friend that is a producer, and I think that was what like really. Her name is Alejandra Vargas. Like she's from Noche Negra, that production company, and like I think when she entered the project, that's when like it kicked off. Like, oh, okay, like this is because of course she was like, okay, now we should like really, because I didn't go to any workshops or labs with this idea, but more I went in the post-production portion, like work in progresses and things like that. And that was because of her, like kind of pushing the project a little bit.
And did you have a long-term relationship with that producer friend of yours from perhaps film school days?
Yeah, so I met Ale in when I was in college. She was like 1 year above in the program, the same program. And yeah, and like I met her that time. We hadn't worked together because like she was in a different like stage. But we kept in touch, and I've always really liked her. So like it was like the move that I thought was proper for me, and like and it was like very casual too. Like we were like drinking something, and we were like talking, and I was like, I have this thing, and I just talked with this person, and she was starting off Noche Negra. Like she had just like created like the LLC, and it was like, oh, let's just do this. And I was like, okay. Yeah. I don't think she knew how long it would take to
No, over drinks, it feels all like, let's do this thing. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a picture. Okay, it's going to be the first documentary after production. I guess that's how it went. Yeah. So in the editing process, you also had an editor with you. It reached that stage where you needed somebody else to come in and really face the material. How was that process? Because I imagine you had a lot of footage being a documentary.
Yeah, so, and it was a lot of footage, and some of it was like in different languages, like Chinese and Cantonese and the dialect. So that was like definitely difficult to navigate. But so as I said, I started working on the edit by myself, and then at some point I hit like a wall, and I was like, I cannot do this anymore. Just because like I think I knew so much, and I was like a character in the film. I was definitely self-conscious about seeing myself in the camera and like everything. And so I invited my editor, Robert Pereira. Like he's a really close friend of mine, and like it also felt very natural to me to ask him, just because he's as a friend, he had seen my whole process of like, I want to make this film. Oh, I want to go to China. I think he was one of the first people I called when like I got the yes that I will go to China. And so I think like he kind of had understood my journey from like a friend point of view. So he had a freshness in that side. He's Costa Rican. And so we talked about it. This is his first feature-length documentary as an editor. And so I like the idea of like growing together too. And so we're like, okay, let's do this. And like when we got funding, I did feel like, oh, like this is like a job. Like we have to like I can only do this when I have some money to like offer. And so when we got the Costa Rican funding, we were able to kind of work on it together. And that was in the middle of the pandemic. So that was really hard because I was in the US and I couldn't get out of the US because I didn't know if I left, I could come back and like, well, that would do to like my studies or whatever. So I stayed here and we had like a lot of remote sessions online. I did like a walkthrough of like the chronology of the actual events. But I actually think that because he didn't know the chronology of the actual events of everything that happened, he had a freedom. And so like when he started editing, I was like, I would have never thought of putting this and this together because it wasn't like that, necessarily. But for the story, it served for clarity. It was like, so I don't know. I think like that was very enlightening to me to like have someone that I would trust a lot in the editing process. But it was hard at first, like making the decision to do that was hard because I was like, but this is so personal. It's my family. And I feel like I could only give this project to someone that I very much trusted because like there's stuff, like there's footage that, I mean, no one will ever see, but it's like I'm like in very vulnerable positions and like my grandma is also like maybe like is more sick and like things like that are not in the film because I didn't want to like portray it in that way, but he had to go see all of that, and so for me the relationship with my editor was very important for this film.
In a way it's like a meeting with another family. It's a movie about a family, then you have your film family kind of making the film with you and constructing and growing with you with it. That's very interesting. How was the remote process? What resources did you actually use as means of communication? And I imagine a Dropbox and etc. has to store the files.
So we used Frame.io a lot. Like when it was like closer to like the fine cut, I'd be like, no, longer these, shorter these, like this kind of thing. But I remember that something that was very important for us in the process was that we had this Google slide. And we would put like the main like image of the sequence of a sequence. So Google's like a PowerPoint, but like on Google. And and we would put it in like the smallest view possible. And so we would see the whole movie kind of thing. Right. I mean, I would have done that in person if I could, like, we couldn't do it. So we just did it like that. And we like kind of play with the position of things.
It's like a card system, almost like an outline, but when you're already in the editing
like
process.
a card system. And this was very important because there is because guys, the narration was so hard. The narration part was really hard, and that system helped us kind of understand like where exactly the narration is going to go, what links with what. We have to move like, and sometimes it's like, oh, this narration does not go with this piece of sequence. Like it doesn't make sense. And so it was just like that kind of puzzle that we were doing with this digital card system. In a way. But those were like the two main things. And we zoomed in a lot, like we talked a lot through Zoom, and we had a few, I think more towards the end of the process, we had more like he was literally with his editing like software open and he would do certain things and we would see it and I was like, oh yeah, that looks good. But that was really tolling on both of us. Like we were like, I'm exhausted doing this like this. And so in what year was that? Like 2021, at the end of 2021, or because 2023 was last year. No, last year, actually, I think. Towards the end of the pandemic. Like the pandemic is a blur for me. Like I don't know the years. But we actually were able to finish the movie together. Like I did meet with him in person when like things were clear to like travel and stuff. And I was really able to like sit with him and like do those final things because, and that's when like I think it took a better shape. And after that, we did do a little bit of extra work, but more like, oh, you have to redo your narration of this or fix this, or we need a little more something. Yeah. That was kind of like the process online. It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I have done narration, and it can be quite complicated. Repeating lines, then your voice goes like this, and just pitch changing.
Exactly. I remember like my sound designer was like, your voice is different here. I'm like, because I did all of this in one day. It's like, you don't do that. I'm like, okay. Yeah, because the narration was a very lonely process, actually. I was like alone in a booth doing the thing, actually. But it was interesting how it like I would write and be like, this is it. And then I was there and then I would like change it a little bit as I was like reading it. So it was.
And was it done after the shooting or before? Was it a mix?
So I had a notebook where I kind of wrote thoughts of like what was happening, and that was very like helpful for me. That inspired some of the text, but how it all came together was after the edit. While we were editing, my editor was like going at it. I was writing text. Yeah, so I would say it was in parallel to the editing stage because the narration gives shape to the structure. So there was a time where the film was like very not chronological and it was really confusing. And that time the narration was very different too. And we're like, no, this doesn't work at all. Like no one can understand this film. Where am I from? And so we had to like kind of change it to simplify, in a way.
Yeah, and perhaps there were moments where something that was already written helped the edit somehow.
No, yes, definitely. I think that happened more at the beginning of the process where I had like narration that would like pinpoint certain moments or historical things. And I was like, oh, okay, like we need to put this in this part. But it was interesting because after the work in progress in Malaga, I got some notes of like, oh, I think we need a little bit more of like, why did your grandma came? Like more more specifics, a little more specifics. It's very poetic, but like we need a little bit more of like, oh, you're in Costa Rica and like, and talk a little bit about like the beginning of the film. And so I was like, oh, okay. And so those sequences already existed. And then I kind of wrote a little bit. And so that already exists, but I think it became more cohesive. The images became stronger through like the writing of that narration. Yeah. So it was a crazy all over the place, but it's kind of messy process, I guess. Yeah.
And also, so regarding your decision to go to China and film there, how was that like first being in a new country, being in a different context? How was your experience there? Not just with that new context, but also emotionally. Maybe I imagine it was a bit overwhelming, maybe at times.
Definitely. I think it was such a humbling experience for me. I feel like I had a lot of preconceptions because I was like, I come from a Chinese family. I know what the food is like. I know what Chinese sounds like. I like all of this like stuff. And I feel sometimes very stupid because I was like, oh, I'm not gonna have culture shock. Like I was like, oh, this is gonna be so fun. That was like everything like, when I just like, I was boarding a plane and like everything. I was with my friend Milton. Actually, I flew to China for the first time with Milton together. And so I thought it was just going to be like a very fun ride. And it was maybe for like the first 24 hours. And then, I was like, oh, this is not, like, China is so big, right? And so my family actually comes from the south of China. And I arrived and lived a very long period of time in the north of China, in Beijing. And so I was like, this is very different. This food, I don't even know what is this. And it broadened my understanding of that, but it made me feel like, oh yeah, like this is the limit. I have a limit as a human being of knowing things, and it broadened my perspective. And I was like very, but it was shocking that I felt bad that I was like, all the stuff that I thought I knew was very wrong, very, very not like what it really is. And so it was very humbling experience. There was cultural shock. I felt really bad when like people talk to me in Chinese and they'd figure I don't actually speak the language or know, like I'm not really Chinese. And like this thing that I say in the film that like they would say, oh, you're like a
fake Chinese or
like
pretend
fake,
Chinese.
Yeah, like a fake Chinese. I was like, it's for real. Like people would tell me that, and then they would be like, "What is Costa Rica?" Like, they don't even know what like that's a country. So it was like a whole thing. So the first thing that I learned was like, "Oh, Costa Rica." Like I learned how to pronounce Costa Rica and tell them it's a country and like all of this. But yeah, it was like oh, I am exactly in the same position or worse as like when I was in Costa Rica, in a way, in terms of like communicating and being with people and having all these preconceptions.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how honest people are, because you show that precise reaction when we are in Costa Rica. We see taxi drivers kind of having their say on what is your nationality and what isn't, and what country are you from. And then in China it's the same thing. Yeah. It's curious when you have dual nationality. People can have various reactions to it. They're very, very strange. And at one point, you even react to a taxi driver saying, "How would you feel if people said if you were from Mexico?" Yeah.
Yeah. I think like that. Yeah, that's actually my mom saying to them, like, "Oh, like if you were from, like if they said you were from Nicaragua," and like that kind of rubbed something, because Costa Ricans have a thing about Nicaraguans like coming over to Costa Rica, right. So it's like. Yeah, but definitely, people kind of don't understand or cannot put themselves in that position,
Yeah, I see.
The music is very particular. It has minimal touches. So how was the work process with your composer, Diego Rojas?
Oh, Diego is so amazing. It was like wonderful. Like Diego was like someone that he actually emailed me, and I was like, oh, who is this person? And then and he sent me like some music, some like curated, like he read about the project and he just sent me like some music that he thought was like the vibe or something. I was like, oh, okay. So I started listening to it and I was like, oh, I like this. And we had like some terrible temp music, like while we were editing. And we're like, oh, maybe this is like, because I did feel, I want to say actually that I had thought that I wouldn't have any music at the beginning of the project. Like I will have no music because I'm not a very musical person actually. Like it's really hard for me to talk about music. And so when Diego reached out, I was like, oh, this is interesting, and I really like his work. And so I scheduled a meeting with him, and he had actually worked with a friend that had a documentary too. And so I asked her, like, who is he? Is he? And she was like, yeah, he's great. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I talked to him, and Diego he's from Colombia, but then he moved to New York and now he lives in Canada. So when he told me that, I immediately felt like, oh, he's this person that kind of connects with the film itself as well, because of like this movement that he has had with his family. And so I was very excited to like kind of share that too. And I think, and I just really liked him. Like he's very kind, very gentle. And I feel like I needed that because it was the first time, like if you guys saw Comadre has no music because I can't think of music like that, I think. And so I was very daunted by the idea of having a composer. I didn't really know how to talk about it. And then I realized like the process of talking about music was, well, in my case, because I don't know anything about, I don't even like know how to play any instruments. I'm like, oh, I I'm just talking about my feelings, you know, like, oh, the way that I want to feel, the way I want, like what I want to emphasize. But I did tell him that I didn't want like a big orchestral thing. I want like very small sounds and very small things, because I didn't think the film was like a big thing. It's a very intimate film. So I wanted to kind of emphasize that through the music in very specific parts of the film.
So you'd say your intentions were more talking about your feelings rather than actually saying, I want this or I want that.
Yeah, I was just talking about my feelings all the time. And I think he's very good. I think he's a very good composer because he was able to translate my emotion, you know, and just like translate it into the music, because I am just very bad. I was like, you know, and he will understand like when I say nostalgic, oh, I mean this kind of tone or whatever. Like it was very interesting to have that, because as we talked, he would translate it for me. Like, you know, it's like, oh, you're saying this. So do you think it's something like this? And then he would do a little something. I'm like, oh, yes. Or no, that's what I mean. And so like, it was like a very interesting process for me. I feel like I grew a lot from that. Yeah. And I feel like I'm less scared of like original score, you know, because I feel like original score is scary in the sense that like you're like kind of committing yourself with someone, and you don't, there's nothing is created yet, and like you kind of have to marry with that person. So I was kind of scared of that process, but it was good.
Yeah, and also communicating as well in a language that you're not formed or trained in.
Yeah,
you know, it's difficult. But don't worry, you can't be worse than me, because yes, I go for feelings, but I also imitate a bunch of instruments when I'm with the composer. It should be like this, and then I start, you know, we want a trumpet, I have that, I can do that. So I go various ways. And they say, okay, I think I got what you want from your mouth thing you just did over there. So just keep a swing.
Yeah.
But normally, to understand me, that's how we arrive at you know, a partnership. They listen to me, and you know, it comes out in their work. We have another question regarding, well, it's a very personally handmade film, so really it's two questions. What camera did you use, and if any crew, any extended crew beyond yourself, was there anybody helping you per se? For example, with the sound, I imagine would need someone.
Oh, this question. Okay, I will. So I used like a very small DSLR camera. I had like a Canon 60D, and that was what I used to shoot it. It's like, I don't know, it's like an entry level DSLR. Yeah. It's very, you know. And so there was like a lot of work in the post production with the image, you know, like to achieve the final look of it. But my colorist was like, oh, this looks great, you know. I was like, okay.
It does look great.
Thank you.
I even thought it might have been film for a second. I was like, wait a minute.
Wow.
But then I saw the reflection. I'm like, okay, no.
Sure. No, yeah, like, but I'm glad because it had that feeling, you know, of like it being filmed. But like, but yeah, I think like what helped was like I was using prime lenses, so that kind of helped the look of the film, I think. And for crew, like mostly it was me. I think like the one moment where it's clear there is a crew is like when my parents are like studying and there's a crew there and I'm not even there in person. That was shot in pandemic. Wow. I was like in a computer.
Nicole had a second unit director. You do it.
Yeah.
I'll be on the computer.
Actually, the director for that part was my editor.
Okay.
Because he was in Costa Rica and we were in the middle, and so it was for us like what made sense. And so he directed that part. And so my editor was the director during that part where I was not there. I was like in a computer. I mean, I was telling things, but then I was like, this is really weird because my parents, of course, like they are conscious of the camera, like I'm in a computer. So it was like, I just kind of briefly talked with them. I had like a conversation with them first, and then I was like, okay, I think they're warmed up now. And so I left. So they closed the laptop where I was in. Because that was like during COVID actually. So I couldn't be there in person. And so that was one time that we had like like a proper like a camera person. There was a sound. There was so the sound was the sound designer. The editor was the director. I had a really close friend that did the camera work, and he studied what we because these specific part of the film is shot while we're in post-production. Like I realized I needed I needed some footage from Costa Rica and specifically of my parents. And so I had them film that. But before that, it was just me with like a small boom on the camera, and it was just me alone most of the time. Yeah, it was like that, like 90% of the film. If I'm on camera, and like for example, when the door opens and we're there and like someone else is filming, that's Milton, and he has no training. I was just like, just go for it.
Go, girl. Go do your thing.
But he did great. I was so grateful. He did really well. I was like very, very happy with that. But yeah, it was very minimal, I guess, crew.
Yeah, makes sense. And but well, it's very interesting to see, for example, there are some early images in the film where you really take time around your grandmother's house. And it's just, well, it's you, I guess Milton is on the camera. I don't know, perhaps you have mounted it alone. But it's very interesting how you really take advantage of the idea of what is our grandparents' house when they are not really there anymore. And even these non-places has corridors become places again, become important, or the rooms in which you say that there used to be filled with chairs, become something with story to us, something of heavy weight to us than most people. And I think you filmed that, very beautifully, very nuancedly, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, was Milton involved in that, or was it just you?
No, that was me alone. Actually, that was really old footage. Really, really like from the very
beginning.
From the very, very beginning. So there wasn't anyone to help.
Yeah, but it's very impressive how you, with your own camera and microphone mounted on it, did get a very good, soundscape into it. Even the sounds are very specific. Even the bugs I feel sometimes, the birds.
Yeah, I think my sound designer was a little bit upset, but
oh, there you go.
because she wanted, of course, to have like better quality, best everything, but it was like, I mean, it's a documentary. Let's try to like work it. And because she was in Costa Rica, she did a lot of Foley work too. So like
I see.
Parks and like the cityscapes and all that. Like she would go and do Foley for that because we definitely needed like to have that like ambience. And oh my God, I just remember while we were in post-production, like I asked some friends from China that were living in China. It was like approaching the Chinese New Year. So it's like the same time period. And I was like, we need Foley and ambience of these because I shot it and it was like sometimes it's not very good. So, and they just sent me with their phones a bunch of like sounds from China, and that we also used in the film. So it's like very like handmade kind of.
Yeah. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very authentic.
Yeah.
So as mentioned previously, your feature got selected for Visions do Real International Film Festival. And how was that experience like in terms of the perks of being a participant, masterclasses, workshops, all that?
Oh, it was so good. Well, it was my first time in Switzerland. They were I feel like Visions do Real is it's a big festival, but it like once you're there, like everyone gathers in this small part in the nights, and like you get to kind of talk with everyone. The programmers are there, like the artistic director Emily is there. Like you're able to kind of talk with everyone. It feels like very like familiar. I don't know, like it's not like super daunting. So it feels, I mean, it was daunting anyway, but like it didn't feel like terrifying. I feel like I was very lucky because this year, one of the master classes was Lucrecia Martel. So I was like very excited to go to that. I really wanted to see Alice's Road Watchers.
Oh, Alice Rohrwacher, I think, right? Yeah. I really like her as well.
I
Yeah.
really wanted, but like, I mean, it's Switzerland, it's very expensive, so I couldn't be there like the whole festival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many days were the festival and how many days were you there?
Like the festival is like, I don't know how many days it has. I was just there like 5 days, I think, because my film played more towards the end of the festival, not to the very beginning. So I arrived like 3 days after, so maybe 7, 8 days. I don't know, something like that. I don't remember clearly. But they also had these morning talks, and those were really cool because the filmmakers that had kind of like a selection of filmmakers that had shown their work the day before had a conversation, and they usually had like a through line between their work. So it was interesting to hear them talk about it after seeing their films in a way. But I just felt like it was people were very approachable in the festival. And I don't know, I felt like, and I do think that they make a really big effort into like having a full theater. Like they make an effort to have a lot of people there watching the films. The Q&As are like really, people ask questions and they're engaged with what they're seeing. And I just met a lot of wonderful filmmakers too. So I felt very inspired and very grateful to be in that selection. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you get to do any Q&A of any kind there, or any networking opportunities? Oh, cool.
I did a Q&A on the first screening, and that was nice. I was very scared, but it was fine. Also, it was very emotional for me that the screening at Vision to Read, because it was the first time my parents would see the film. Like my parents actually, I flew them in so that they could see it. And it was very beautiful to share that moment with my mom and my dad and my brother. And yeah, it was nice. And so I was also extra, like an additional layer of nervousness, because I think the people that I care the most were seeing the film at that time. Yeah.
So regarding Comadre, your most recent short concerning a Mexican nanny looking for new work, I personally really appreciated the emotional restraint of it. You portray situations with a subtle and mostly unimposing camera. The acting is also fairly contained. The situations you wrote are also, they're dramatic, but they're not overly dramatic. And they're never really super in your face and confrontational, which I think helps make the film feel more impactful and sadder because you see the development. And so in contrast, not contrast, but in a comparison with Guian, I think you frame Comadre differently. So it's a much more still camera, whereas Guian, obviously, it's much more intimate. There's the handheld, and it's really felt. So, how do you come to those decisions, the visuals, and how do you decide those things?
So, thank you so much for saying such nice things of Comadre. So it was a very different process, right? Like, Comadre was like a film that was like a first forward to narrative for me. Honestly, I really, really wanted to Comadre like a handheld, like that Dan Brothers kind of thing. I love that. I love it. But when I was writing the film, and when I was thinking about how I want to work with my actors, I was like, I can't do that. I don't think I can do that with this film, because I wanted this nanny that I have met and I casted for the film to be able to kind of live in the frame without worrying about like, oh, then we're going to cover it again and you have to do the same thing. And I wanted to remain very natural for her to do what she was doing. I do think you can cover definitely a scene with like the movement and all of that, but I just felt like for me, she was such a quiet character, and I felt like from all the conversations I had with nannies that they were kind of trapped in this routine in a way. And so I felt like the restraint of of staying very still and just observing them, because there are people that are usually not observed. I thought having that would be precious in this film, and so I kind of self-censored myself into doing this style, which I really enjoyed, honestly, because I think as a first narrative, I just worried about one shot per scene, like one setup, and then I was just fully just talking to her about like what we were going to do and everything. And so I feel like that's kind of why I went through to that decision. In contrast with Guian is like a very spontaneous film in a way. I actually, there were a few times I think I mentioned to Robert, like, I wish I had been more still. I wish I had just like, I and it's because I was learning how to make films. This is my first one. It's a process of many, many years. I was absolutely alone doing it. And so I kind of just like accepted the youth of that film in a way. And I don't know, but I do think like now, because I have these two very different kind of styles in a way, I'm very conscious of like why we make these choices now. Like I feel like with Guian, it was more like a no choice kind of thing for me. But for Comadre, I was like, no, I think I'm going to be very intentional about it. And it was definitely a little bit slightly controversial because Comadre is a film that is on in film school. So it, like, I remember like my mentors were like, but are you covering this scene? like where is the coverage? Because like my line script would be like, yes, it's one line. That's all there is. And so in the set where I was like very worried about like the length, and the film is a little bit long, but I have no regrets, guys. I have no.
The Guardian says Nicole has no regrets. A film to see.
The interesting thing is that in our film school, I feel like that would be way less controversial if someone doesn't do coverage. Because here in Europe, I guess there's a different tradition in terms of how you film. So people are much more like the long takes and the single shots.
Yeah.
That would actually be, oh my God, he did a long take? No, that would be the thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's very, it's controversial a little bit here. Like that, I had to like really talk about it with like my mentors, and like also because like they just were like, what are you gonna do on the edit if you mess up? Which I understand is like a very valid thing. And so what I did was like I did very, and because the actress is a natural actor, like every take was different. Like the length of the take was different, everything was different. So I was like, okay, I'll make like a super short one, like a medium like duration, and so I could have like some wiggle room in the edit room.
I understand you don't want to overwhelm the actress, who isn't a trained actress, with the intricacies of very difficult blocking, like you said, as well. And what was the experience of really directing somebody who is virtually an unformed trained actress?
It was so, I was freaking out the whole time, and actually, oh my God, so now this all coming back to me. I actually casted a different nanny, and I did like a wide cast within this organization that I'm like really close to, and because I did my research within this organization. So like I first had like interviews with them. I went to this thing that they have, the social coffee, and like I know all of them. I go to their parties and stuff like that, and we share a lot together. And so from then I was like, as I was writing, I was like, I need to cast one of them. Like there is just no way that I will get the actual texture, and I want to be as truthful to representation as I can, because it's a community I not necessarily belong to. And so I was like, until I casted one of them. And Magda, her name is Magda, she had like a medical procedure done like 2 weeks before the shoot. And you have to understand, these women are from a very vulnerable community, and when like the opportunity, healthcare in the US is crazy, like getting any medical procedure is very complicated. And for her to have that opportunity, we talked about it. And I was like, of course you have to do it. Like my movie is nothing compared to this, you know, you have to do it. And so she got it. It was a minor procedure, but she had to rest, of course. And so it was very hard for me to make this decision. But like I talked to her, and I was like, I don't think we can be in a set like 12-hour days, and like, you know, it's work, like you will have to be standing and doing things, and it's stressful, and I don't think it's good for your recovery. And so we agreed together, like, we shouldn't do this. But I couldn't move my shoot because everything was lined up with like school's equipment, like everything was kind of locked in place. And so I locked in the person that ended up being, her name is Reina. And she's great. Like she was, so I did the casting for both of them, and I was between both of them, and they're actually both very good friends. And for me, it was very important that I let know Magda that I wanted to cast her friend Reina, that if she would be okay with that, and all of that process, because I knew that she was very excited to be able to make this. And now she's in floaters, so it's all good.
Okay.
But yeah, like I think working with, and so, but I do have to say that I did a lot of rehearsals with Magda, and like 2 months of rehearsals. And those rehearsals taught me a lot, so that when Reina came in, I knew what I had to do with her. Like I kind of understood like how like the specifics of like, oh, this scene, I got there in this way with Magda. I think I need to do something similar with Reina. And so we were able to like a very intensive, like 2-weekend rehearsal, like very intense with Reina. And we hit it off, and we were able to go to shoot. But it was definitely, it was a thing.
Yeah, I can see that. Very intense experience.
It was
It's
intense.
very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, just one question, how did you connect with that organization? What was the interest in this new community?
Yeah, so when I came to Austin, I didn't know anyone, and so we were like in the program with like other colleagues, and one of them, Fumiya, actually, he was doing a documentary. He's been working with immigrant stories in Japan. And so when he came here, he was interested in the immigrant stories in the US. And so he was like, in Japan, it's very rare to have nannies and this kind of person that is outside of the family taking care of the children. And so he was like, oh, this is like very new to me, and I kind of want to approach the community. But of course, he doesn't speak Spanish. And so I was a translator and producer for a short that he did. And so his subject was Rosario, who is the leader of this organization.
Yeah, I saw his film about her.
Yeah. And so I became super close friends with her, and just because of my friendship with them, and then I started going to these social coffees, and I just befriended them. And I helped a little bit the organization. Like they were going through a transitional time of like expanding a little bit and like looking for funding and things like that. And because I speak English and Spanish, I was able to help them a little bit, because they do have the barrier of language. And so I kind of started thinking a lot about how these women live. And actually, like, I thought a lot about my language barrier when I was in China, and how hard it is, like, you know, to look for a job, to try to engage with people. How do you thrive in an environment where like it's hostile to you in a way? And so, and I think like those two things kind of came together. And then the pandemic hit in 2020, and I was like wanting to write something that was because I've been doing Guian, right? And it's a very personal film. And so I wanted to challenge myself and do a film that was more research based. Like I had to like read about the community and have to approach people. And so my approach to this narrative film was a little bit documentary in the sense that I kind of reach this community, I kind of hang out with them, like this kind of thing to be able to find a story. Yeah. And
taking really interesting risks because, you know, you're incorporating someone who isn't an actress in it as well and going beyond what is your percepted style, right? So that's very interesting.
Yeah, it was scary to do that, but it was good. It was yeah, like I actually never showed and I actually like for floaters too, I had like a very similar approach, and I never showed them the script. Like they don't memorize the lines or anything. Like they know what the story is about, like roughly like the scenes and all of these, but they don't memorize any of it. Like we just do it on the rehearsals. I put them on a situation, and then on set we kind of remember a little bit of that situation or a similar situation to get there. Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay. You don't present any lines to them then at all?
No.
Okay. Yeah. No, you're not the first to do it. And I've spoke with other filmmakers, and it's very interesting to see that kind of improvisational style. Another risk as well. But yeah, very interesting. Produces interesting results.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something similar happens in the show Curb Your Enthusiasm with Larry David. He does kind of the same thing with the writing process. Yeah. So in the locker room scene in Comadre, between Ale and Marielitos, you decide not to show the entire conversation from the shot of them together, and then you cut to the previous shot of the locker room while they're still speaking. And this is at the moment Ale asks Marielitos not to tell her mother about what had happened. And you know, if you can you explain your intentions behind this bit of edit? Because sometimes we see this in films where we go back to a certain shot and perhaps it's to transition better to a certain scene or not to see the characters' reactions. And I wanted to know your intention.
I think like for me, that precise moment, I don't know, I have a thing with voice that I feel like there is a very like a strength in just listening to the voice of a person instead of seeing them. I think there's like, I thought like their performance was strong. Even if we saw them, but like I felt that it became stronger and more emotional to feel the bond of this private moment between them without seeing them actually. And so the way to cover the scene that way was to return to that shot. But like my intention, more than showing the locker room or showing like that space, was to not see them, because it was, for me, like the pre-departure, like they're like kind of like to kind of see that very intimate bond that exists between the nanny and a child that she takes care of. And I felt like showing it wasn't necessarily the way to do it, but more to witness it like through hearing only. That was kind of my intention with it. Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
So what's your favorite part in the filmmaking process? That was my question. Because, you know, there are directors who prefer editing to shooting, for example. So we're really curious about what is your favorite stage of the production process?
I actually think I really like everything before shooting. Like I really like the research stage. Because everything is possible in that part of the process. Like you're writing and you're meeting people. Well, for me, I'm meeting people. I'm like trying to connect with someone to kind of understand where they're coming from, like what are their desires. And so for me, that part of the research is like very exciting and like everything is possible in that stage. And then when I'm doing like casting and these, like I'm also like kind of seeing everything, like kind of like creating like the character in a way, but also connecting with people. And I think that's what I like the most. I am like I'm more of an introvert, but like when I'm doing this process, I kind of like feel an excuse to kind of ask a lot of things and kind of, connect with people in a more direct way without feeling kind of weird out because I have an excuse to be there, And so for me, my favorite part is like the kind of the development part is very like one of my favorite parts. And then I do really like production, actually. I think it's the lead to production is like the most stressful thing in the world, as you all know. But I do enjoy being on set a lot. And I think my least favorite part is the editing process.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I just hate I think it's because you have to confront what you did, right?
Yeah.
And so for me it's hard, like that confronting, and then like I don't know, the hardest thing for me is to sit down and do it. Like once I sit down, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do it. But like just the choice of sitting is like, because it's a little painful because you're like seeing and you're like, oh, should have done this. Why didn't I think about that? And that kind of really it's pulling for me, I think. And so I don't know. I think like the editing is the most painful part. It's not I hate it, but it's the most painful, I want to say.
Yeah, being in a dark room all day and kind of go through all that footage, totally understandable. And the preparation is a wonderful phase because as you prepare and research things, you kind of can't believe when it finally arrives to the shooting. I think, I don't know if you have the same feeling, but is it tomorrow? Is tomorrow our first day of shooting? Okay.
Precisely. That happened to me with Floaters just recently. Like I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it's here and we're filming and it's going to be over so soon. And it was over so soon. Like I was like, what? This is it? We did it?
How many days of shooting was it, Floaters?
Floaters was four. Oh my God, I'm blind. I think it's 4 days of shoot and 2 days of prep that I had. Yeah. I like to prepare a lot. Like I think sometimes I even over rehearse.
No, definitely. I like rehearsing a lot. So, we are on the same basis, actors, everybody else in the room. Okay, time to work now. Because when you get there to shoot, it's against the clock. There's no fucking waiting around.
Exactly.
Sorry, kids. Yeah. You need to get it. And for example, to me, shooting is the thing. Shooting is my editing. Like I can't.
Really?
There's aspects of it that I like for sure, but it's not precisely because of that run against the clock aspect. It's just, and then imagine being like director, writer, and producer of your film, like you've been. It's just trying to manage a bunch of people at the same time as you're, trying to communicate with your actors, the scene. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot, I think. I think what has helped me is that when I lived in Costa Rica, like in between like coming to the US, like I was in like I came back from China and then I came to the US, but like in that in between I was working as a production coordinator in like, some films. And so that helped me kind of have a little bit of a producer mindset, and I think that has helped. But I would never just produce myself because I would lose my mind, I think. So.
Yeah. You certainly, I'll say this, you certainly gain a certain taste for it, I guess. There's a side of it that is interesting when you're calling people, trying to make things happen, the logistics of it. And when it seems like it's always a no, and then you can get something, for your film. It's like, oh yes, I got it, the boss. That feeling of conquering something.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good feeling when you get, even if it's like a small thing. It's like,
even if it's like a small thing.
Yeah.
I got a chair. That's great. We got a movie.
Exactly.
Also, we have another question. What are some of your major influences for Guian and Comadre in visual terms, like any films or even other artworks?
So for Comadre, actually, there is a Mexican filmmaker called Lila Avilés. I don't know if you guys know her. No. She has a film called The Chambermaid, which is actually about these women that work in the hotels, like the cleaning ladies. It's amazing. Like, you guys have to watch that film. And that film is very still. It has like some moments of movement, but it's very, very still. And so after I pitched this film, like with my friends and colleagues, like I had a Mexican friend that was like, you should watch this film. And then I watched and I was like, oh my God, everything's possible. And so it was a very big inspiration for me. And for Guian, actually, the work of Naomi Kawase was what kind of inspired Guian. Like I saw, by pure chance, I saw Embracing and Katatsumori. They're like about her father and her grandmother. And so those films have like I think that she has a thing of like approaching, like using their camera as a way to approach things and make it very tactile in a way that I kind of really thought was so powerful, and so I'm very much in love with her very early work of documentary.
She does have a documentary about her grandmother. I don't know the title.
Yeah,
it must be that one.
That's a Katatsumori.
Right.
Yeah, like
I
her
saw it
grandmother
years ago. And I really, really loved it. Really loved it.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
So when and how did the jump from Costa Rica to Austin, Texas happen?
These happened because my education, mi formación, how to say in English.
Mi formación.
Yeah, so I studied communication in Costa Rica. I didn't study film. And so I was like, I want to study film. And so I felt like the US would be like a very interesting place to go, like because of the resources. And so, but the US is very expensive, like the education. And so I applied to the Fulbright scholarship. And these kind of like, I got it and I was like, hey, I can do it. And then I ended up here in Austin, thanks to that kind of help. Yeah.
And it's going well?
It's going well, except for the pandemic. So I arrived here in the fall of 2019. So that was August. So I only had one semester that was like normal before the pandemic hit. And then the pandemic hit and we all freaked out. Like we couldn't shoot. So I took that time to write Comadre and research. And I guess that was good. But like in terms of like my advancement in the program, it kind of slowed down. And so that's why I'm like graduating, I think, until now, because like I've had like a major setback. Yeah, but otherwise it's been good. Like I feel like I've made like really great connections with filmmakers here that I really love. I think I've expanded like my film family, and I do appreciate being here in a place that feels not like crazy, competitive, weird, like a place like LA would probably feel. And I think that is good for my process in a way, I think. At least right now, I think that's good for me. Yeah.
And what other places of America would you like to explore?
Oh man, I really want to go to New York. Like that's the place I want to go, but I haven't been able to. So but I would really like to go to New York. I went to LA last year for a little bit and it was good, but I'm not sure. I don't know if I can survive there, like.
We spoke about this. Yeah, it's true. It was some strange.
It's what everybody thinks. Can actually make it there without dying.
Yeah, or like I just feel like quality of life, guys. Like I just kind of enjoy like, I don't know, like peace and like having a place to kind of chill and not like be always. I just feel like if I'm in LA, I'll probably be just thinking about film like 24/7, which is not a bad thing, but like I do feel like one needs to make compartments of one's life, and I don't know if I can do that. Yeah.
Now we wanted to ask you a little bit about Floaters, more in tone of conclusion, to see how's it going, what's the story, if you want to reveal anything, of course, and how's the process going. You're in post-production now.
So Floaters has a very similar approach from Comadre, in the sense that I'm working with natural actors. This time I'm working with a teenager. Well, like the three of them are not natural actors, but like the main characters are a teenager and a 11-year-old girl. And so I was very scared to work with natural actors of this age. But it was a very like beautiful process for me, I think. And it's basically a coming of age story of this Honduran girl that just arrived to the US like maybe a year or two ago, and how she's kind of coping with her family in Austin, Texas. And the post-production is going. It's a very different. The visual approach is very different from Comadre. It's like it has a bit of both worlds in a way. It's like still sometimes, but sometimes it's not still at all, which is like something new for me, I think, in terms of like figuring out the blocking and all of these. So I felt like it was the natural kind of step up for me to kind of work more on my blocking. And the mise en scène with like the actors. I'm excited about it. But there's still a long way to go because it's still on the rough cut stage at the moment.
Yeah. The film is still related to your college in Austin?
Yeah. So in Austin, in the MFA program, we have we have to do a pre-thesis. That was my Comadre. And this is my thesis film, like the culmination.
And are you editing it, or do you have an editor?
Oh, I have an editor. It's actually Robert, like the same editor. Okay. Yeah. I was like, oh, let's continue this collaboration. And as I said before, like I'm like very interested in like growing together, and so I really wanted to continue working with him. And Diego is also Diego is also working with me as a composer, and so we've already kind of started. I feel like I take it very seriously when it's like I have a film family and like I want to grow together with them, and so this is kind of my way of doing that. Yeah.
And as to streaming platforms, where can we see Comadre and Guian in the future?
Hey, I actually not sure yet.
Sure.
I'm not sure yet. Like my, I mean, we're still like my producer is like the one that is dealing with more about Guian. And I don't know that. And Comadre, although like it's already done like a pretty good festival route, it's still going. So actually, so it's still not on platforms yet, but it's going to be playing in the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival in the online platform. So it's going to be actually available in June. Yeah. Or like, cool. Yeah, it's not geo-blocked, so anyone can see it for a period of time. Yeah.
Is Guian still available, or is there still a festival run to go through?
Yeah, there's still a festival run for Guian. So I'm waiting to hear more festivals, and I can't kind of disclose, but we're excited.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And that was the latest from Nicole Chi, folks. We would like to thank her presence here today. She's an excellent filmmaker. Have a look into her work once out on streaming platforms. We will keep you up to date. If you're a filmmaker running the festival marathon, feel free to send us a message for an interview as well. We would love to promote your work. Don't forget to subscribe, share this interview, or simply give us a like. That's how our podcast can grow ever more groovy. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.
See you next time.
See you next time.